own strengths, forte to reckon with. But Peter Barry, in the introduction again to beginning theory, says, please don't read exhaustively when it comes to theory. Take one critical school and read intensely. That means do an intense, not exhaustive. No, doing this and doing that. Please don't do that. Take one critical school, that which you can relate to, and then do an intense work on that, right? Intense study. I was reading Gayatri Spivak's a critical book, right, towards the history of the vanishing present, a critique of post-colonial reason. It's a huge book. One page of Spivak took me almost a week to read because, it is a slow process. Mastering Spivak is very, very difficult. So this is just for you to, don't worry about, theory. If you know one theory, do it well. And don't feel bad, if you don't know all the theories, not necessarily needed. But please remember this also, the theory helps you have an engagement with society in a better way. That's it. Now shall we quickly go into the next part. Now the first part I told you what is critical theory or literary criticism all about. Theory definition I'm yet to give you, that will come in the third part. Right. So now in the second part, I'll give you the beautiful demarcation of the 4 types of theories that M.H. Abrams gives us in his wonderful 1953 book, The Mirror and the Lamp. I told you it was part of his PhD dissertation, which was later published as a book. Now, he surveys the whole panoramic view of literary studies, and then he divides it into 4. So the first, approach, he says, is mimetic. We all know that. I'm just giving you a revision. Mimetic approach, right? And the second one, mimetic means we all know, no? It is imitation, right? Art is just imitation, right? The mimetic. And the second one is the pragmatic approach. Pragmatic, utilitarian, right? What is the utility of this work of art to me, right? How does it benefit me? This is the main aim of approaching a work of art. Third one is expressive. Expressive in the sense, right? It comes from within. William Wordsworth says this in his definition for poetry. Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotions recollected in tranquility. That's why it's called the lamp. The mirror is different, right? The mirror imitates, but the lamp, it emits, right? It radiates. So this is the third approach. The fourth one is the objective turn or the objective approach. This comes in the 20th century. So the first one that M.H. Abrams gives us is, right, mimetic approach. The second one is pragmatic approach. The third one is expressive. And the fourth one is called the objective turn. And the 20th century and thereafter, we call it the objective turn. Right? Why is that? And the reason is very simple. Objective means, right, there are two, here. One is subjective. Subjective means very highly personal. Objective means, right, impersonal. Right? That's what we talk about literature, highly personal, subjective. But they wanted to make it objective in the 20th century. Why did they want to do it? And the objective turn is otherwise also called the linguistic turn, because for the first time, language found a lot of emphasis from the 20th century upward, right, into the 21st century. We'll deliberate on that in a moment. So another demarcation is there for theories. I'll give you both, M.H. Abrams' demarcation and this one. This one is, they divided into 4 again. Contextual approaches. The second one is author-based approaches. The third one is reader-oriented approaches. The fourth one is textual approaches. I repeat, contextual approaches. Then the second one is author-oriented, author-centered. The third one is reader-oriented. And the fourth one is text-oriented, right? So these are the 2 broad ways in which they divide, theoretical approaches. And Roman Jakobsen has given us another interesting way. You can key it on Google. We don't have time. The 6 functions of language. There also you can easily demarcate, right, theoretical paradigms. Now, The first school of the 20th century that I intend to discuss would be the Formalist school. I'll just give you an overview. Maybe when you get back, you can log out, you can start working on that, right? And Russian formalism, any critical school, any, will have a trigger. That's what we saw, isn't it, right? Will be a reaction to another school. Some crisis must have triggered this school to come up. What was the trigger? Right? When we read authors, what was their inspiration, we ask. Right? What made her to write this? What made Spivak to come out with this wonderful critical piece, Can the Subaltern Speak? Here, the Russian formalists were a group of wonderful critics, writers, who dabbled in what is called the autonomy of the work of art. What was the trigger? When we read when we study or discuss the trigger that made them, work on the school, it's very interesting. It goes back to the 1830s when Russia or Soviet Russia was completely in the hands of what is called people who always, praised the establishment. So they were called prophets of propaganda, right? Or propaganda prophets. Prophets of propaganda because, they always praised or extolled anything good about the government, Soviet Russia. So there was a poet, and a writer, a radical critic. His name is called Dmitry Pisarev, Pisarev. He joined as a scholar in St. Petersburg University in 1856. There, he studied history and philology. After 2 years of studying there in the university, you know what he said? He gave a very radical comment. He said, I would have gained much greater value by reading the newspapers for these past 2 years than spending my time at the university here doing nothing. So what he meant to say was, they don't teach you any values for life. According to him, any literary work or any art should not only have aesthetic value, but also should have a functional value, social value attached to that. So now there is no functional value to that. And he wrote an essay called The Destruction of Aesthetics. You should read this essay. There he talks about how aesthetics alone will not suffice. He gives a very good example. The apple, the apple in art doesn't have any value, right? But the apple in real life is beautiful because it has value, right? So I would prefer an apple in real life to an apple in a drawing or in art form. So he always advocated a social, didactic, moralistic approach to a work of art. And there was another writer, we all know him, a very famous controversial writer, Vladimir Nabokov, who was against any morals of any kind, like, the Dubliner, Joyce. He was against any morals. He said, works of art don't use any morals. That is enslaving a work of art. Please don't use any moralistic paradigms to judge a work of art. A work of art should be free. Don't, say that it should support this. It should be pro-Soviet or anti-Soviet or non-Soviet. No. It could be the way they like it. So, this was the time the formalist stepped in. There was a crisis in Russian society. And the formalist stepped in and said, form determines content. I repeat, form determines content. It's a very, interesting phrase, isn't it? Form determines content. Why did they say that, right? And what is form? I'll give you an example from Victor Shklovsky. We all know him, 1917. He wrote a wonderful essay, right? It is called Art as Technique, or the other translation, Art as Device. So in this wonderful 1917 essay, Victor Shklovsky says, he gives us a concept called defamiliarization. In this concept, he says art should be made strange. We have all been habitualized to a cliched perspective of things around us. In this essay, he says, how many of us have looked at the walls in our rooms with such specific focus? How many of us have looked at the walls in our room? And he says, most of the time we fail to look at the errors in a page, right? The misprints or the spelling errors in a printed page, because our mind and our eyes are familiar with whatever we read. And so we don't look at the errors. And this happens, and another example he gives is the example of the violin. The violinist who plays doesn't even bother about the strings, the beauty of the strings, the beauty of the violin. What matters for him is the utility. Look at that. Here, utility means the content. Form is something called, you can call it a style. So defamiliarization is a style, it's a device, it's a technique that helps understand content. They're not worried about the content. He gives another good example where he says, no one is bothered about the content in a lorry, right? In formalism, they are worried about the carriage van or the lorry, right? How it is, right? Because they say the form determines content. Habitualized perception of our friends, the way we look at them. Habitualized perception of our college, our institution, makes us not realize the aura, the beauty of the things around us. That's what the formalists say. What Bertolt Brecht talks about in his epic theater, the concept of alienation effect, or what Walter Benjamin talks about in his 1935 wonderful essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. The aura is lost, he says. So, they wanted an art which will not be enslaved by any other criteria. Art for art's sake. And because, most of them, like Dimitri Pisarev said, there is no future for the arts, in the destruction of aesthetics, he says, there is no future for the arts. I would rather be a Russian shoemaker than a Russian artist, he says. Pisarev, shocking, isn't it? Because a shoemaker at least has some use value, an artist doesn't have. Shocking. So towards the end, he ends by saying, I wish that we tilt more towards the scientific or the technical approaches. Only therein lies the future of art, he says. So these formalists wanted art to be autonomous in itself, and they wanted to technicalize it. And that is why you have these devices, right? A celebration of form in what is called Russian formalism. There are many other, schools that they associated with. One is called the futurist school. The formalists, they always collaborated with the futurists in Russia. The futurists, as the name itself implies, tells you that they rejected the past, that they rejected tradition. They did not like the past. Like, kids today do know, if you talk about the good old days, chumma, don't talk about that, right? So they did not like the past. They talk about only the present and the future. So they collaborated with the, futurists, Futurists, and they came out with a beautiful treatise. It is called A Slap in the Face of Public Taste. I repeat, a slap in the face of public taste. That means the public taste was so cliched during their days. They were all dogmatic or ideologically conditioned. So he wants them to come out of their mundane lives. And how can they do that? By having a defamiliarized perspective. Well, Viktor Shklovsky gives us an example. Leo Tolstoy's story on Kolstoma. It's a story about a horse. Kolstoma, another translation calls it Strider. Right? Kolstoma, or the story of the horse, where A horse